Bo Bennett has studied how the human mind processes information through both an individual and social perspective. His research examines logical fallacies, cognitive biases, and their impact on group decision making. In this episode, you will learn about the differences and connections between cognitive psychology, which focuses on individual thought processes, and social psychology, which considers how people interact and influence each other. You will also hear about the business Bo built and sold for over $20 million. And you'll also hear about how Bo has written over 50 books by working with AI.
To give you a layman's definition, the difference between cognitive psychology and social psychology is cognitive is more of the mind, like what goes on in your head, why people have these thoughts and beliefs, where social psychology takes the interaction of multiple people. It's not as individualistic, it's more plural, and how other people's behaviors and actions affect other people. So that's really the difference. But I was fascinated with cognitive psychology, but the program I was in, and the school actually did not have cognitive psychology. So I focused on social psychology, which was the next best thing, in my opinion.
Okay. And is this where that whole idea of like logical fallacies comes into that? Because that is not a term I've heard before. I've heard both words before, but never together. So I'm curious, like, what are logical fallacies?
Yeah, interestingly, logical fallacies are mostly philosophically based. It's a large part of philosophy, which entails like logic, the traditional logic, reason. But logical fallacies also have argumentation, and there's a huge crossover between logical fallacies and cognitive biases. So logical fallacies really deal with argumentation. They're mistakes in the way that we think and the way that we respond, but almost always it has to do with argumentation. Whereas cognitive biases are more, again, individualistic. They're more the way we think, and it doesn't have to have anything to do with an argument. But there's so much crossover, and there is so much psychology in logical fallacies that it was just kind of like a natural thing for me to really get drawn to logical fallacies, and my work is mostly focusing on the psychological aspects of logical fallacies rather than the traditional logic, if this then that, that's been covered for millennia actually.
And how do these affect our kind of day-to-day lives and decision makings? I'm trying to get like a real world example of this whole logical fallacies and cognitive biases.
Sure. Well, politics is one of the biggest ways, and just manipulation through the media, the way politicians talk to us. If you listen to, I don't know how it is over there in London too much in England, but where we are in the USA, there are politicians who really do nothing but spur logical fallacies and say false things. And if you're not attuned to critical thinking, and if you don't understand logical fallacies and what they are, and basically it's recognizing when you're being duped. If you can't recognize that, you're going to fall for it and accept the information somebody is telling you as true, just pretty much because it sounds good. So to give you an example, a logical fallacy might be like a very common one is the straw man. That's when you're arguing with somebody, and somebody may have like a good argument, like, don't you think it might be wrong to allow anybody they want, like machine guns, to walk around? Don't you think that's not a good idea? And then the other person may say, oh, so you want to take away guns from everybody? You think that's fair? And like, whoa, wait a minute. And when you're listening to this, you may say, oh my goodness, that person wants to take away everyone's guns. Then the other person won the argument. No, that wasn't the argument the other person was making. Because the argument the other person was making was really kind of like a reasonable one, like everybody really shouldn't be walking around with machine guns, then it's a lot easier for the opponent to create what's called a straw man, a fake version of that argument, a version of the argument that's easy to knock down. So that's what somebody may do. And if they're slick in their communication and they're a fast talker and they really don't slow down, the audience is just kind of overwhelmed, or the people listening to this, and they don't catch that. They just kind of work right into that and say, oh, I can't believe this person's actually arguing that everybody should have their guns taken away from them. So that's an example of the logical fallacy. A cognitive bias is a very common one, is the cognitive bias when you believe pretty much everything that's said from somebody who you agree with. Oops, sorry about that. So if somebody that you agree with is like just spitting out all this nonsense, then you will tend to agree with them without critically thinking about what they're saying, just because it's you want to agree with them. It's easier to accept information that you already believe, and that's called the confirmation bias. That's one of the most common ones. And likewise, if somebody who you tend to disagree with starts telling you facts, you would tend to disagree with those facts just because it's a lot easier not to agree with them because you already don't believe in them. So you just kind of like ignore that information. And that's called the confirmation bias. It's probably the most common bias that we all share, and it's probably the most dangerous as well.
And it seems like critical thinking is a way to avoid these forms of manipulation or persuasion. So my understanding of critical thinking is that, you see both sides or all sides of the argument and come to your own conclusion based off that kind of information that you've got. But I'm wondering, for you, someone who's definitely much more of an expert in critical thinking than myself, would encourage people to become more critical thinking based in their actions.
Yeah, of course. I think critical thinking is an absolutely wonderful thing for everybody to do. I think it's a worthwhile endeavor. I think that everybody should really think about it. Just think about what critical thinking is. It's thinking without oversimplifying it. I mean, it really is thinking critically about information that's presented to you. And a lot of times people will just, like I said, do the confirmation bias, or just because of laziness, they will just accept information that they hear. So say they turn on their favorite news program at 5 o'clock after an incredibly tough day, and they're just exhausted. And when you're physically exhausted, you're also mentally exhausted. Your cognition does not work as well. You just kind of relax. So you're less likely to think critically, and all this information is coming into you, whether it be true or mostly false. It doesn't matter. You tend to believe it. So you would want to try your best to engage, and that's just like asking yourself a lot of questions, like, wait, why is this true? This person told me this. How could I verify that? What would make that true? What test can I do for that to actually be true? Like, how would I know that? So simple questions like that will take you down the right path. And then ultimately, you might say, well, like, what evidence would I accept for this to be true? And that's a whole other area of logic and reason. It's basically understanding evidence, what evidence is, what different levels of evidence there are. There's some evidence that's very good and some evidence that's like loosely considered evidence is not very good, but it's better than nothing. So understanding where evidence sits on the hierarchy of importance, that's critical to logic and reason as well.
And so when you're out here trying to live your life and just, get through life in the most peaceful way possible, realistically, people are always trying to persuade you to do things or persuade you to buy things. And you're kind of saying like, hey, make sure you think about this. Make sure you have a moment of like checking that what you think is true is actually true. Where can we kind of do this kind of research? Would you suggest just Googling these things, or is it something that you suggest like reading books about? Like how do we go about confirming these things or disproving these things?
Well, the confirmation bias that I mentioned before is one of the biggest problems with Googling, because we don't even have to talk about the whole technology aspect of it, how the algorithms basically cater to our political and religious and social preferences. So basically, it feeds us information that we want. In order to find conflicting information, we have to dig a lot deeper. So that's usually not the best way to go. And plus, with the confirmation bias, we'll come up with the first article from some unworthy source that says something that we like, and therefore we'll say, good, see, I'm confirmed. I'm vindicated in my beliefs or my decisions. But that's not how it works. And this is an extremely difficult task in understanding like what sources of information are actually good sources of information. And that's where it gets a little bit tricky. I have some general rules for that. One being, if you're asking a scientific question, scientists is the best source of information. So not like not like even for-profit organizations or political action committees or politicians. Like, you're not going to get good scientific information from that, or religious communities, religious organizations. That's not where you're going to get accurate scientific information. If you want accurate scientific information, you have to look at scientific literature. These are peer-published, reviewed papers that talk about the different topics and show results and have done testing on it. The problem is, like, the average person, it's just too complicated to read something like that. It's much easier to read like a summary in an article of a newspaper that you like to read. And some papers get it right, but most do not. Especially when a scientific issue is intertwined with politics, then it tends to get really messy, no matter where you are on the spectrum, because there are like political influences that, or social influences that might get in the way of the actual science. So it's really good to look like scientific journals. Even like, YouTube is like notorious for like horrible information, but it's also incredibly good. There are professors from MIT on there. You've got the best of the best on YouTube as well, and also the worst of the worst. So it's a matter of like making sure that you know your source. And when it comes to legal questions, that's another one. In our country, again, the United States, the legal system, like the judicial system, that's who you should go for, or that's who you should look at for answers to legal questions. Like, you probably know, like we have a politician in our country that's under scrutiny for many proposed illegal schemes, and is been indicted several times, and there are people saying like, oh, he's completely innocent. Like, whoa, wait a minute. And they're all saying, he's completely guilty, lock him up. Like, no, that's not how it works. We have a system that of like the jury and judges who like painstakingly look at all of the information, all of the evidence, and then they make their judgment based on all of this information. If you're not privy to all this information, you should not be making a judgment from your couch in front of your TV at home. And the best you can do is say, like, I wish for the best this person. I wish that they get a fair and honest trial. That's it. That's all you can do. You cannot say that they should be set free or they should go to jail for life. You can't. You leave these decisions up to experts in the field. And unless you're some like a law scholar who has inside information, pretty much keep your mouth shut on those issues. Let legal experts give you the information on that. And then, of course, that comes to, well, what about legal experts that certain news programs bring on? Well, of course, you have like right-leaning news sources will bring on legal experts of their own, and then the left-leaning. I mean, these are lawyers. Lawyers will always argue for their clients or for their positions, even if they represent a murderer who was caught like stabbing somebody to death. They're still going to argue for them and do their best job. That's kind of their job. They're supposed to do it. They don't represent truth. They're not like scientists. Scientists represent truth. That's what they're supposed to, scientific truth. Whereas lawyers are just supposed to basically support their client, or in many cases support their own biases and political and whatever positions, legal positions. So that's why you kind of have to leave it to the court systems. And then when it comes to social issues, that's probably one of the last categories. That's probably the most tricky, because social issues aren't well defined. So if you're thinking about, like, how do I know the difference? Like, like, should programs like stop and frisk or something be implemented? Do they do more harm than good? Well, those are a couple different questions, and that's important too when it comes to critical thinking. It's think about the question itself and be able to take that question and break it apart. So, like, does stop and frisk reduce crimes? First of all, I know nothing about this topic, so I'm just using it as an example off the top of my head. But let's say it did, there would be data to support that. And you could look that up and you could see, yes, well, according to the statistics, it's very clear that this does reduce crime. That's one question. You could say, okay, now should it be implemented? That's a should question based on moral and ethical considerations, like it's not right to many people because they abuse it, cops abuse it, and people are arrested unjustly or whatever. So there are moral arguments to that as well. So when it comes to moral arguments, it is really, it's a little bit more open. Ethical, moral issues, there's no, like, always single right or wrong answer to those. So those are a little bit more tricky, but they still require critical thinking nonetheless.
Mm. And were you using these kind of critical thinking tactics when you were writing your many books? Like, there's too many for me to list off and name, but you've written so many books on so many different topics. Were you coming at these questions or topic areas with the idea of critical thinking, of like seeing both sides and coming to a reasonable conclusion of your own, of your own kind of research?
Yes. Several of the books that I've written, they're all about logic, critical thinking, and reason. And I do often upset, like, my readers, because unlike somebody who's, like, either religiously or politically on one side or socially, I really try to see both sides of the issue, or all sides. Many times it's not just a one or the other type of thing. There's a lot of different aspects to an issue. So I try to explore all of that, and that's what critical thinking is about. But some people don't like when I explore those. They're like, oh, you can't say that, or you can't talk about that. It's like, well, yes, you can. And yes, you should. And then if you come to the conclusion that, well, this is a horrible idea, then great. But if you don't talk about things, and that's what I write about in my book, Uncomfortable Ideas, then they basically just fester in communities, like where teens live in their basements and go online and build these communities, and they're sheltered from true information, from like actual data and information. And it gets really dangerous. And these are the kind of people who would, do horrible things. So it's important to talk about pretty much everything. And I know there's a lot of controversy and debate on the idea of platforming, and should you talk about these certain things? Should you give, let's say, like a neo-Nazi, equal time to somebody who thinks that that's completely wrong? And I mean, those are really good questions. And my personal belief is no, you shouldn't. But it doesn't mean you should completely silence the other person easily. You should see who's saying what and think about, like, okay, now that we know that there's this segment of this community that believe these things, why do they believe it? Is there any truth to it? And if not, how can we educate them better? How could we help them see what actually is true? So these are important questions, and you can only ask those questions if you do pay attention to the people saying and thinking crazy things. So that's part of critical thinking as well.
Mm. And I wonder if you could talk me through the process of writing books when you first started versus writing books now. What's changed? What kind of things are you doing now that's different versus, however many years ago when you started writing?
So my first book I wrote was in 2004 is when I published it. I started writing it in 2001, and that was called Year to Success. And I started writing that right after I sold my first business of significant value. I wanted to take all these ideas that I had and everything that I believed in and put it together in a really thick book, a 740-page book, and have that for my children to read, like everything I've learned, like a lifetime of, not really a lifetime, I was only 29 at the time, but early lifetime of everything that I've learned, and put that into a nice little tome for them. So when I first wrote that, that's what I did. This was before my PhD. So before I really studied psychology and science. So a lot of it was a little bit like cringeworthy, I would say. Like when I read it this like a second time, when I was ready to revise it after the 10-year edition. So things changed after that. When I did revise it, I implemented everything I learned through like psychology, and I've taken these really good concepts, these really important concepts of like psychology and motivation, achievement, success, and I've made them a little bit more science-y, if you will. I took out a lot of the rah-rah stuff that really didn't help much, and in fact, I believe hurt a lot more than it helped, and put a little bit, made them all a little bit more factual based with references and so forth. So when I revised that book, I kind of cleaned it up quite a bit. And then every book I've written after that point, that's when I've really implemented the critical thinking and logic and reason. But now more than ever, I should say, the biggest change that I've been making is the books that I write now, not all of them, but most of them, I use AI, because I've had, over the course of 20 years or so, I've had this notebook filled with ideas of all of these books that I would want to write. And it would take multiple lifetimes to write these books. There's no way that I could have possibly done it. And then AI came along, and it was decent at first, and then it got better and better and better, until the point where I finally created a whole company called BookBud.ai, around the idea of writing nonfiction books. So you could just come there with an idea, put in the idea, it walks you through, like it creates a table of contents for you, and you could add to it, you could add to each section, or you don't have to, it'll create the whole thing for you. So I took a lot of my ideas that I had and I plugged them in there, and in the past, 6-7 months or so, I've written over 50 books. And these are like decent sized books too, with the help of AI. And there's no way I could have gotten that done without AI. And it's just so fulfilling to have these ideas out there. And AI does a fantastic job of taking what you give it, like the inputs that you give it and your ideas, and just really going with it, and just creating a very well written, accurate, factual book based on what you've written. So that's how I've written my last 50 books.
Wow. Yeah, like I said, there was the crazy amount of books there, and I was just like, I couldn't even list them off if I tried. To be here for the whole episode listing them off. And I'm wondering for you, what AI tool are you using? Because obviously the one thing that's on everyone's lips nowadays is ChatGPT. I'm wondering, what is the AI tool you're using, and how are you kind of making sure that it's writing in your voice rather in that very kind of AI way of writing, which is very fancy, right, very kind of not human, but also very well written by the AI's terms, if you know what I mean.
Sure. ChatGPT actually is the backbone of BookBud.ai. But just remember that it's the backbone. That means we connect via API, which is basically a programming interface where our computers communicate with their computers and ask for data. The AI provides it, gives it back to us, and we refine it. But the more important part is what we do on our end with the prompts. Everything that we send to AI, it's like perfectly and very carefully written after hundreds of books, like of testing this and refining it. It's a way where we know what to tell the AI in order to make it sound basically in your voice, or a voice that you're looking for. So one of the questions that we ask the authors when they're writing the book is, name a few people of the styles that you really like. So they may say, okay, I really like Anthony Robbins. He's very motivational. I like Steve Martin. He's hilarious. And I like Neil deGrasse Tyson because he's got a great scientific mind and he communicates things clearly. So you put those down and AI will take those styles and write the book like with a combination of those styles. And you may be asking, well, wait, isn't that like plagiarism? Isn't that terrible for people like Steve Martin, Neil deGrasse Tyson, and Anthony Robbins? Well, no, it doesn't. It doesn't actually take their writing. It doesn't go and look for their writing and then pull it in. It kind of maps. It knows who they are. Like famous people, the AI will know who it is. So it says, okay, Anthony Robbins is a motivational speaker. So he's extremely motivational. He's very persuasive. So it takes those characteristics. And Steve Martin is a comedy. He's a comedian. He writes comedy. So we want to do something humorous. So it takes like comedy and humor and puts that in there. So it just takes like the general ideas, and then by adding one or more, you're creating your own voice. So that's the way that people do this.
And sorry to kind of topic hop here, but just a minute ago you mentioned about a business that you sold. I'm wondering what that business was, how you scaled it up, and how the sale went, just out of my own personal curiosity as well.
Sure. Yeah, it was a web hosting business, and I started it back in 1994. So if you remember, like the internet, it was like just the World Wide Web was just becoming commercialized and public in 1994, 95. And that's when I got on board. And I was right out of college, and I didn't have any like financial obligations. I had like a couple $100 rent, so I could put myself in a room and really focus on programming, learning about the internet, learning about the web, and how to write programs, which I did, and I ended up building one of the first website interfaces via web browser where you can upload files. They're extremely common today, but back then there wasn't anything like that. I also built one of the first affiliate programs before Amazon, several years before Amazon had their affiliate program. So I sold these websites through affiliates, and I didn't call them affiliates. I think I call them like just resellers or something. But that really helped the business explode in growth. I was one of the few players out there doing web hosting, and everybody wanted web hosting. So I was just really in the right place at the right time. And then I sold the business after about 6 years in 2001, right before the bust, for $20 million. And then I just kind of chilled for one full day, and then I started the next business.
One full day. I like that specific amount of time. I chilled for one full day, that I carried on. I kept cracking on. What was that moment like when you sold your business? What was it like to see that kind of money hit your account? You know, what did you do? Did you not even like let out a yell or a scream or anything like that?
It was actually a kind of like a gradual process. Like the first kind of shock was when I found out that back in the late 90s, businesses were paying like 4 to 5 times revenue for companies. And there were so many companies just like eating up all these web hosting companies. So then I did the math and I said, wow, our company is worth a lot of money based on that. And that was the first like holy crap moment. And then a little bit after that, a company offered us, made our first offer, and it was like pretty much like half the 20, like 10 million or so. And it was, that was like, oh my goodness, I could have this much money if I wanted to right away. But then I kind of stuck with it a little bit longer, and then the next offer was 20 million, and it was like 2 million in cash and 18 million in like promised stock options for that new company. And I didn't really like that too much, but I didn't have a choice. The first, it was 250,000 at first cash, so I got it up to 2 million. And it ended up that, and I knew that things were coming to let's just say things were taking a big turn in 2001. I knew that was happening. Like the signs were everywhere. And I knew that if I stayed in it more than like 6 months, my company wouldn't be worth a fraction of what it was worth at the moment. So I basically accepted the offer. And it turned out that the company that bought us, after like a year, they went bankrupt. So I wasn't able to get all of my stock options out, but I did get, quite a bit. I think like 12 million or something. So I didn't get the full 20. But at the end of the day, I was still much better off than many other people who pretty much lost everything, or at least lost probably 1/50th of their, 49/50ths of their value, their company's value, after because they waited after the bust of 2001.
And there's this idea about kind of you choose when the top is, or you choose when your peak is. Like you go, right, I think I've had enough of this, time to get out type thing. And there's a lot of people that go, oh no, if you look at this and that, it seems like it's going to go up. And it's like, realistically, if you feel like this is enough, or that was your number, or this is a good opportunity right now, you're better off taking it and dealing with the consequences of that, rather than trying to go for the next biggest option and the next biggest option. So, making that choice when you did, I'm sure you feel like that was the right choice and it worked out for you. So, that's fantastic. And what I kind of want to ask is about success. So when you have success early on in life, it can kind of become difficult to continue looking for success. But from what you said, you took one full day and then cracked on with the next thing. What was kind of driving you? What was your idea of success past that point? Because for most people, they never have that type of experience of a sale of a company and that type of thing. But clearly for you, that wasn't the end goal. That wasn't the moment of success that you were, or that most people would aim for.
For me, success has always been a process rather than like a certain event, like a end goal. So I love working, I love creating, I love building, and that's something that I always wanted to do. And as soon as I was done and eventually wiped my hands of everything that I built, there was like this huge emptiness in my life. And that's why I said, okay, the next day I started Archie Boy Holdings, which is basically a holding company for other businesses that I eventually would start. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but I knew I was going to do something. So it is like, for me, it's more of a way of life than a goal.
Okay. So you're always just kind of following your curiosities and following your kind of current interest and that type of thing. And with regards to the books that you've written, well over 50, you said, what is the kind of marker of success for you for writing a book or getting a book out there? What is it that for you, once you've released a book, you go, yeah, that was a success? Is it completing the book, or is it having, hundreds of readers or thousands of readers type thing?
It depends on the book. And I know that sounds a little bit strange, but some of the books, and I think many authors could understand this, a lot of times you write a book not because you want to be rich from it, or you want to make a lot of money. I mean, that's always like a nice side effect. But a lot of times you've got these ideas, you just want to get out there and you want people to read it. We have a lot of clients at Book Marketing Pro that we work with that write books, and they say, yeah, just it could be free. I don't care. I just want as many readers as possible. So that's kind of like the goal of success, is like the number of readers. They want their ideas to be propagated. They want to be remembered for something. So that's one of the goals. One of my books that I've written was my autobiography, at least up to the time I got married. So it was kind of like a childhood thing. And I always wanted to write that just because the stories are hilarious. And it was for me and my friends and my family. And that's it. I don't care if anybody else bought it. So that was a unique goal because I just wanted to write it. And it's not like I want everybody in the world to read it. I just wanted really my friends and family to read it. Another book that I wrote, Squat, it started out as a book and then turned to a screenplay, and now it's an animated sitcom that you could find on YouTube. That was kind of like scratching this lifelong itch of writing a comedy series. I always wanted to do that. So, I mean, it would be great, of course, if it became the next Family Guy or Simpsons, whatever. But if it doesn't, that's okay too. I really enjoy the process. I still think it's hilarious. Some of my friends thinks it's hilarious, and I've got a small following, and they love it. So that's good enough. But there are books like Logically Fallacious. That's probably my most classically successful book that sells many copies, and it's used in universities probably all over the world, but mostly the United States. So I consider that like one of my most successful books.
I'm glad you mentioned that about, writing things or creating things just for your own personal entertainment and to like show your friends or show your family, because like you said earlier, a lot of people go, oh, I just want as many people as possible to read it. It's like, if you aim for everybody, you're aiming for nobody. There's nothing in this world apart from, let's say, maybe water that is for everybody. And even then there's, Evian water, and then there's Fiji water, and there's all different types of ways to kind of segment people that, want to drink water, and there's tap water. But like, realistically, when you're creating something with, life in it, let's say, as in something that's like a book or a show or music or anything like that, if you don't make it for yourself, you're not making it for anybody. And it's a weird kind of space to exist in when you're creating for everybody as opposed to somebody or the target audience of yourself.
Right. And that's one of the beauties of AI as well. Typically, like you couldn't write a book for such like a small segment. It just like is not worth anybody's time. It's too expensive. You're never going to get your money back. But with AI, you can actually do that. You could write a book for like a group of 20 people if you want, like a full book, and that's fine because it's a very low barrier to entry. And financially, you could probably make your money back even with 20 people. So that's another very interesting thing with AI. We're going to be seeing a lot of very niche topics that typically you wouldn't have seen prior to this.
No, yeah, most definitely. And what ways do you think AI is kind of shaping and changing our future, both positively and negatively?
Well, on the positive front, the benefits they seem never ending. Like we're learning about new things every day. How mostly what it's doing, it's taking a lot of these mundane tasks that all of us are stuck doing and automating it, making it so we don't have to do that, freeing up creative time. And time is probably, I would argue, it's our most valuable resource that we have. So for me, like all of this stuff that I used to do and just spend so much time doing it, I don't have to anymore. I use tools like ChatGPT. I use voice from 11 Labs, which is also we have a company called authorvoices.ai that uses 11 Labs as the back. And all of my books that I used to narrate, like right now, I've been talking for probably 40 minutes and my voice is already starting to get a little hoarse. Just like imagine narrating a 16-hour book. It's like pure hell. And I have to do it over many, many days. And you have to do all this editing, and it's just crazy because you don't speak word for word clearly when you're narrating, even when you're reading, and there's a lot of editing involved. But with AI, I could clone my own voice, which I did, and it sounds exactly like me. I cannot tell the difference. My wife can't tell the difference. And it could read all of my books. And like within like an hour, it could have like a whole book fully narrated like perfectly. So that's just like one of the many examples of it saving me enormous amounts of time. And that's just me like in the publishing and in the book writing, the author industry, doing business. But you take anybody, and no matter what field that they're in, and most likely they could use AI to help them in some way free up a lot of their tasks and hopefully make a little bit of money in the process. And if people are wondering, well, like, how could I do that? I'm like a fireman, then ask ChatGPT. Say, hey, I'm a fireman. How could I use AI to help me in my professional career? How can I use AI to help me personally? And all of a sudden it'll tell you, it'll give you ideas. So I think that AI is like where it is now. It's making our lives easier, But not just easier, it's also freeing up our time so we could spend our time, our valuable time, on more important things, more creative endeavors, with family if we want, for personal things. And then maybe even working on ideas to help us make more money. If you had like idea for a business that it's like, oh, I never have time for that. Well, now you do. You might be able to do it if you learn how to use AI to help you do that. So that's the positive, and that's just now. Like, where is it going to be in 6 months? There is some talk like with the new Apple operating system, it's going to be completely integrated. So Siri is going to be more of like a personal assistant, not just like the stupid thing it is now that could tell you the weather or whatever. It'll be incredible, like an assistant that could send emails for you, that could really interact with your browser, type things for you, do orders for you. It'll be kind of like a virtual butler in a way. So that could really help out a lot. Robotics and AI. Just think about having a robot in the physical world, like helping you with everything, doing dangerous things that people do now. So those are all the pros. The cons are, and I'm not going to go into the doom and gloom of AI taking over the world and releasing nukes or Terminator type stuff. I tend to be an optimist, and I don't think that we would ever get there. I can't imagine like AI coming up with a motivation to kill us all. But if you want to go down that path, there's plenty of conversations for that you could find on YouTube. But for me, I think the one serious one that is immediate is displacing people that have these jobs who tend to do mundane things that AI can now do. And I think there's always been, we've been in this situation many times before. And even just like with machinery and machines in auto factories where people used to do all this stuff by hand, now you got machines to do it. They could do it so much faster, so much cheaper, and so much safer. Like nobody's going to get killed, or few people will, but not as many. And that's just what happens. And then those people have to look for new jobs. They have to be retrained. They have to, and that's unfortunate, but it's going to happen. So I think people need to kind of look ahead and say, what am I doing now? And does AI, does it, or is it in a position where it's going to take over what I do, and can it do it better? And if the answer to that is yes, then you really got to start thinking about your career and what you've chosen to do, and how you can work with AI, use AI to your advantage. Don't try to fight it. You're not going to win. Just like technology and machinery and robotics and all that stuff, and the automobile versus the horse and buggy. People have always tried to fight it, always said bad things about it, but it's just going to come. So work with it. Go with the flow, and you'll be much happier. And if you get ahead of this, then you'll be in a much better position than the vast majority of people who are similar to you in similar positions. So start thinking about it now.
Yeah, and there's a thing there that you touched on about the human element of things. Like obviously nowadays everyone's pushing for like remote work. Everybody wants to be working where they want to work, when they want to work, how they want to work. And
Right.
a great part of tech is me and you are now able to speak. We connected over the internet. We're here talking. You're thousands of miles away, but we're talking seamlessly to the second. But one thing with technology is there is no human element. Do you know what I mean? There is no kind of ability to pick up on that weird thing that you can kind of sense in person of somebody. And I think that's where AI is kind of gonna lack forever, is it's not going to have that human element, such as being able to put the ideas into the machine. Whether or not it can churn out the ideas that you've put into a useful thing, that's a different question. But for you, you're always coming up with ideas, and so are many other people, and that is what will be kind of, I don't know if the right word is exploded by, but blown up by, is the fact that you can put in your 50 ideas and come out with 50 books, whereas AI is not going to come up with 50 ideas for 50 books. It'll come up with 1,000 or 1,000,000 different ideas for books that aren't quite right, that aren't all the way there, and don't really kind of cater to an audience. But one of your books that you mentioned earlier was about uncomfortable ideas, and obviously AI is something that is currently an uncomfortable idea for most people, people being displaced from jobs and all that kind of stuff. But how can we use the idea of uncomfortable ideas to better ourselves as a person so we can grow and also kind of progress?
Well, I think it comes down to, again, not shying away from uncomfortable ideas. And that's one of my first suggestions in the book. When you're approached with a topic that's uncomfortable, the worst thing that you can do is say, look, we should not talk about this. This is a taboo topic. Let's just keep it quiet. That's not a good way to go, because of all the reasons I mentioned before. Like there will be people talking about that, and it's better to approach these ideas, no matter how uncomfortable they may be, and really think about, why are they making you uncomfortable? Why is this an uncomfortable idea to you? I think as somebody who lives a secular lifestyle, one of the uncomfortable ideas for me early on was exploring religion. I grew up Catholic, and I did all the sacraments, the holy sacraments in Catholicism. And, my family's very religious, or at least mostly religious. So, like my sister and my brother and my parents were, my family is not. But it was one of those uncomfortable ideas for me to look into religion and say, okay, I grew up believing this, but why? My parents told me this. The nuns at school told me this. I never really, I always accepted it, and I never really thought about it again. So, and then the whole idea is like, oh, geez, what if I do look into this, and it turns out that, like, I don't believe it anymore. Like, was my whole life earlier a lie? And that's like really uncomfortable to some people. But, for me, it wasn't too bad. The position I was in with my current family, like they don't care. But you can imagine, like, people, especially here in the United States, in like the Bible Belt, we call it. The United States is much more religious than the UK. And here, if you came out as being non-religious, if you just say, whoa, I don't believe anymore, then you could like get divorced, you could lose your family. I mean, it could be horrible for you. Or if you're a child, your parents could kick you out. I mean, there were horrible stories. Like, people like really like the religion here. So that's just like one idea, or one example of uncomfortable ideas. But I would always argue that, with few exceptions, and of course, like if you are like a 16-year-old and you're going to get kicked out and you're going to have to live on the street and end up doing drugs and die, okay, maybe you shouldn't look into this until you're at least 18 and you're able to support yourself. But for the most part, I really believe that, like, knowing the truth and exploring these issues and having like a sense of integrity about what you believe and why you believe it is more important than any discomfort that you may feel on your journey while exploring these different topics. So I think that's what it's really about. It's like getting to the truth. The more true things you know, you're going to be better off in general.
And kind of following on from that with an idea of the truth and something that's true to you, I'm wondering, Bo, out of all the things that you do, you seem to have done so many things over your life. You've written so many books, you've sold a business, you've explored so many different topics in great detail. What is it about what you do that brings you the most joy?
It's the creation process, without a doubt. I love creating things. Every time I create like a new website, I'm a programmer by trade. So I love programming. I get into the state of flow. You probably heard of that, when I'm just doing it, and then all of a sudden, like 4 hours has passed, And you're like, what just happened? Like, how is that possible? And that happens to me all the time. Like when I'm building something, you don't like constantly look at the clock. I'm just so like into it, and it's just so fulfilling when things actually work the way you want them to work, and when people enjoy it and they send you feedback. Oh, I love what you built. This is fantastic. Thank you. That it really feels good, and that's what keeps me going.
Where can the people find you online?
There are two websites. One is you'll find my personal books, and these are the books that I've written personally before AI. You'll find those at bobennett.com. That's my name, BOBNNETT.com. And my other website where you could find the businesses like bookbud.ai, authorvoices.ai, bookmarketing.pro. Those are the three primary ones where I'm focusing on the publishing industry. You could find those at archieboy.com. archieboy.com is, again, the business I started in 2001, right after I sold my first company of significant value. So that's the one that everything is basically under.
Thank you for listening to People Explained. New episodes come out every Monday. We would appreciate it if you gave us a review on Apple Podcasts and shared this episode with a friend.